Hello, this is the 51st lecture on Revelation and World History. We have completed chapters 1 through 6 of Revelation and World History. We have completed the first half of the 12-chapter lecture and are now entering the second half. We have covered several crucial topics in the interpretation of the book of Revelation. We have discovered the true identity of the two beasts that appear in Revelation chapter 13, the seven-headed beast. And we have come to know who the beast with two horns like a lamb is, the one corresponding to 666. We also found a community of 144,000 people. We have also historically verified the relationship between Gog and Magog and Babylon. We are now examining another important topic, the Battle of Armageddon. In this lecture, we will explore a third of humanity will die. Revelation and World History, Chapter 7, Section 3. A third of humanity dies. By these three plagues, a third of humanity died by the fire, smoke, and brimstone that came out of their mouths. Revelation chapter 9 verse 18. In the prophetic text, a third of humanity should be understood as a third of all humanity. Based on the 2017 population of 7.5 billion, a war would have to kill at least 2.5 billion people. Therefore, the interpretation is that nuclear war is the only possible way to achieve this. However, we must carefully examine the meaning of die in the text. The world population in 1940 is estimated to have been around 2.3 billion. The 70 to 85 million people who died in World War II represent approximately 3% of the total population. Therefore, it wasn't a war where one-third died. If this was the rate of death, even in the horrors of World War II, a war where one-third died would be unimaginable. So, does the expression die in the text really mean the loss of human life? We must find the context within the history of the fulfillment of prophecy. All of these events are related to Babylon, the nation that played a central role in the fulfillment of prophecy. However, the nation we identified as Babylon was the Soviet Union. There was no war initiated by the Soviet Union that resulted in the death of one-third of humanity. Furthermore, the Soviet Union suffered the greatest number of casualties during World War II, with approximately 27 million deaths estimated by the Russian Academy of Sciences. Rather, it is no exaggeration to say that one-third of all human casualties were Soviet. If so, then it can be said that there has been no historical event that killed this one-third up to now. However, the Soviet Union has already disintegrated and disappeared from the face of the earth. Will a more powerful power emerge in history to replace the Soviet Union? Will Russia, which replaced the Soviet Union, start World War III? If a new nation must emerge, then Babylon, the beast from the sea, cannot be the Soviet Union. Let's look back at history again. If the equation Babylon is the Soviet Union is correct, then the historical event of this one-third being killed must also be related to the Soviet Union to be consistent with the fulfillment of prophecy. If we examine a map, we can clearly see this pattern. If we examine the areas of the countries that were communized by the Soviet Union or chose communism, we can clearly see some of these areas. This includes the Soviet Union, Communist Eastern Europe, Mongolia, China, Vietnam, and North Korea. As you can see here, China, the world's most populous country, has become communist. As a result, 30% of the world's population, almost a third, became citizens of communist countries. Furthermore, these countries occupy approximately one-third of the world's landmass. This should be viewed as an approximate area and population, rather than an exact numerical figure. This was made possible by the inclusion of Russia, which has the largest territory, and China, which has a large population. Past interpretations of the Book of Revelation assumed the expression die referred to the total number of people killed in actual wars. However, it is important to understand that many of the expressions recorded in the Book of Revelation and other prophecies are symbolic. It is easy to understand that the term beast actually refers to a specific nation. However, the expression die has been interpreted as if people must die, leading to a failure to grasp the true nature of the matter. The 1/3 of the world's people killed mentioned in the text do not refer to those who died in actual war, but rather to those who fall under the rule or influence of the scarlet beast. Let's examine the text in chapter 8 of the book of Revelation. The first angel sounded his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood, which were thrown down on the earth. 1/3 of the earth was burned up, 1/3 of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. The second angel sounded his trumpet, and something like a huge mountain, burning with fire, was thrown into the sea, and 1/3 of the sea became blood. 1/3 of the living creatures in the sea died, and 1/3 of the ships were destroyed. The third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star, blazing like a torch, fell from heaven on 1/3 of the rivers, and on the springs of water. The name of the star is wormwood, 1/3 of the waters became wormwood. And many people died, because the waters were made bitter. The fourth angel sounded his trumpet, and 1/3 of the sun was struck, 1/3 of the moon, and 1/3 of the stars, so that 1/3 of them were darkened. 1/3 of the day did not shine, and likewise the night. Revelation chapter 8 verses 7 to 12. The text describes a catastrophe that would destroy celestial bodies throughout the universe. If it were to be literally fulfilled, then when it says, stars fall from the sky, a comet or asteroid would actually have to strike Earth, causing a catastrophe in the natural ecosystem. The phrase, 1/3 of humanity will die, is also part of the same sentence as the cosmic catastrophe in the text. Furthermore, war is described as occurring, not only in the natural world, but also in the heavenly world where angels reside. However, as in the war between Michael and the dragon, in Revelation chapter 12 verse 7, events occurring in heaven cannot be observed with the human eye. What people can understand is that they all occur in human society. The text describes events as occurring in both the universe and heaven. However, we must understand that these events are events that take place in the history of this world, in order to understand the true nature of the prophecy. Assyria will fall by the sword, but not by human sword. It will be devoured by the sword, but not by human sword. It will flee before the sword, and its men will be put to forced labor. Isaiah chapter 31 verse 8. This is one of the key questions to consider when understanding prophetic passages. Falling by the sword means war or death by the sword of an invader. However, some historical events in the prophetic books, although described in the text as falling by the sword, are described as not by human sword. In other words, this does not actually mean actual death of people, but rather suggests that the prophecy could be fulfilled in the form of being ruled by some evil power. Therefore, the expression, 1/3 of humanity will die, in the book of Revelation, must be judged by looking at the actual historical context to determine what situation it refers to. 1/3 of the natural world and celestial bodies on earth will be destroyed. Revelation chapter 8 verses 7 to 12. 1/3 of humanity will die. Revelation chapter 9 verses 13 to 21. is a scenario of historical events that will occur when the seven angels sound the seven trumpets. The conclusion points to a history in which 1/3 of the world became communist. This is not explained all at once, but rather depicted as a historical process unfolding in several stages, as the seven trumpets sound one after another. This sound is not something that can be heard with the human ear, but rather something that can be judged by observing the historical progress on Earth. This is because all of this history was not accomplished all at once, but in stages over a long period of time. If it is said that Babylon will reign over the lands for 70 years, then we must compare the historical events that occurred before and after that period to understand it. The Russian Revolution of 1917 ushered in the Soviet regime, and the Soviet Union was established in 1922. Over time, the constituent republics of the Soviet Union merged to form the overall Soviet Union. With the end of World War II, several Eastern European countries fell to communism. At the same time, Kim Il-sung's regime, championed by Stalin, came to power in North Korea. The Chinese Communist Party was founded in 1921. But China as a whole did not establish a communist government until 1949, following the end of the Civil War. The journey from the Cuban Revolution in 1959 to the communist takeover of Vietnam took decades. This represents the process of 1/3 of the world becoming communist. This figure does not represent an exact third of the landmass or the world's population. As a rough approximation, historians and the general public alike say that the communist bloc occupies roughly 1/3 of the world. Given that Genghis Khan's empire is said to have created a great empire that covered half the world, we all know that this doesn't simply refer to the exact size of the territory. Nevertheless, the figure of 1/3 is not merely symbolic, but rather closely approximates reality. Until Eastern Europe fell to communism, it wasn't possible to say that 1/3 of the world's population was communist. But China, the world's most populous country, became communist. Furthermore, as countries like Cuba and Vietnam became communist one after another, this figure is closer to the actual number, rather than an exaggeration. The word Armageddon appears in Revelation chapter 16 verse 16. The word Armageddon refers to Mount Megiddo, or the hill of Megiddo. Zechariah chapter 12 verse 11 describes the mourning in the valley of Megiddo. This passage describes a war in which a coalition of nations from around the world attacks a single nation, Israel. Therefore, looking for a war in which a world coalition attacks a country is a shortcut to getting closer to the reality of the War of Armageddon. In the next lecture, we will explore Chapter 7, Section 4, the Army of 200 Million in Revelation and World History. It was the Bible History School. If you subscribe and set up notifications, you can continue listening to the lectures on Revelation and world history.